don't know is the most dangerous type of crude that can be carried these days. Going through this construction, this configuration, right next to a freeway, right in the middle of an active construction site, feet from my front door, feet from the homes of these senior citizens and many of the people who are living here. My question is very simple, and it's two parts. I'll go ahead and start with the first one now. Can you answer yes or no? Does this kind of construction configuration, double stacked cars, potentially carrying crude oil, Bakken crude oil and other hazmats, on temporary tracks, next to a freeway, within an active construction site, feet from homes, parks, and businesses, increase the risk of a derailment? Yes or no? And then I have a second part. Who would like to answer that? And of course I'm meaning things as construction debris. A hubcap flies off the freeway and lands on the track at just the wrong time. That's what I'm concerned about.
So you want to talk about risk, and again,
Yes or no?
it's yes or no on 5 different topics that were thrown into one question. You can't get to a yes or no answer on that. You've asked about double stack, and you've tried to make the connotation that we run crude oil in double stack containers. First of all, that doesn't happen. This is about increasing intermodal. Intermodal is the only thing that runs double stack, not anything else. We don't run.
What? Intermodal is the only thing that runs double stack. What does that mean?
So double stack is 2 containers. So they are standardized container that moves by ship, by truck, by rail, and that's what the double stack is to do. I don't know of anything that would ever double stack oil containers, much less anything that's liquefied or oil-based or anything like that. So this is for a double stack.
To a double stack container, you have double stack containers that they see all the time.
So that would be a general merchandise train. That would not be an intermodal train. Intermodal trains are what a double stacked. General merchandise are going to have lots of different commodities.
Go ahead.
So again, we don't plan to run any unit trains of crude oil through the Virginia Avenue Tunnel. We rarely see any cars at all. There are no destinations. I know you've talked about Yorktown. There are other routes to get there if that came online. We're not aware of it coming online. Just because somebody's applied for a permit doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to be a new refinery or the likes. We've ran into that down in Fredericksburg where they tried to add an ethanol facility. They were already using some of their bins for other fuel. The community decided they didn't want ethanol being processed at this facility. Yes, they were applying for a permit. Did they ever get it? No. That's been 5-6 years in the process. We do not plan to move unit trains of crude oil through the Virginia Avenue Tunnel, and we don't plan to move crude oil at all in the tunnel. And we don't plan to move any in the future.
It's not a unit. Okay.
So risk, there's numerous things that increase risk. Continue to operating in a tunnel that continues to age and have infrastructure issues is an increased risk. It requires us to go out there and do continual maintenance more often, all the time. And so what we continue to explain is that this tunnel is going to have issues in the near future. It needs to be replaced. We will continue to operate through this tunnel. We'll continue to do more frequent maintenance if we're not able to replace the existing tunnel. And so the risk of continuing to run trains, any type of train, continues to increase without this tunnel being replaced and fixed. So if we want to talk about risk, that's the risk.
Agreement with the government when they first opened the track.
What, that there would be risk?
Was that part of the agreement with the government?
We're going to let her finish.
Well, the purpose, the DEIS says that the tunnel is structurally sound. There are no concerns about the tunnel. So I don't think it's fair to say any minute the tunnel is going to come crumbling down and that's more of a threat to us than what you're proposing, again, in this sort of construction feet from our homes. And again, I don't care if it's double stacked cars of Bakken crude oil coming through this next to my home or single stacked cars of Bakken crude oil coming next to my home. There are 5 cars dangling over a bridge in Philadelphia right now, each loaded with 30,000 gallons of crude oil. And I'm sure they're all single cars, but I'm sure the people of Philadelphia feel a little uncomfortable about that. So, and
Did you have any questions?
okay.
You never got your single You said no unit trains.
Oh, and again, well, you said no unit trains, but again, single car
Are very rare, just like they are today.
are, but we're
And
talking
they're
about the
not typical.
future.
And they will continue to be rare going through there. I mean, we can't sit there and say, because what's happened with those trains is either a car's been misrouted, it's come from somewhere else. There's different things that cause cars to move the way they do. So those are rare occasions that we can't sit there and go, tomorrow in 2014, there's going to be 5 rare single cars that move through the tunnel.
Well,
And
we
so
have-
we can't sit there and say that there's not going to be more than 3, but it's very rare. It's not anything that's planned, and we don't see that changing in the foreseeable future, next year or the like.
Your CEO says differently.
Our CEO doesn't talk at all about Virginia Avenue Tunnel and what
talking
we're
cross
trying to
purposes,
decide.
they're saying, there's a permit, they don't have it, that sometimes these permits aren't granted. I can tell you one thing, you get a permit for for manufacturing oils, it's very, very, very difficult in communities. I don't see how you can put through a tunnel cars of crude oil. I do not see how that would, I said earlier, I think that is inherently unsafe. Now, they say they haven't been doing it. And they also say that the authorities, the first responders, have the information. I will find out precisely what kind of information they have because I have meetings scheduled with them. Now, we got 10 more minutes, I think, for people who haven't asked questions before. Who would that be?
I thank everybody for coming out, and we have a lot of issues, and I thank you guys for raising them. Just bare basics. I'm from Caper, and there's a highway there, and you say you've addressed getting access, getting in and out. How are we going to get out with a highway sitting right there over Virginia Avenue? I asked a simple question, but please, indulge me. Can you just answer a simple question? The trench is going to be here. The highway is over here. How are we getting out?
If I understand your question, correctly, there are still things to be done with a maintenance of traffic plan, and that'll be an ongoing thing. However, what a requirement that was laid out by DDOT very early in the process is, in the event of construction under any of the build alternatives, that all the streets that carry vehicular traffic today need to be open during construction. The highway ramps in that area need to be open during construction. They will be, to get across, there will be essentially bridges that are in place, that will be put in place there. If in the event of construction, when those bridges are being put in place, that work will be coordinated and approved by DDOT. So obviously to do that, to put that bridge across, there is a time period where on a street that street will not be accessible. But like other work that is done, that'll be planned and permitted, and the requirements from DDOT will be to minimize the time. My understanding is that generally, that this could be expected to be, work to be done, in a very short period of time, single amount of days, and it will be coordinated with other work so that it does not create problems. And likewise with the highway ramps, that when bridging is done there to provide during construction, that will be coordinated. So additionally, all the places where there is vehicular traffic crossing Virginia Avenue, there will be accommodations to have, separated appropriately in a safe manner, an area for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Yeah, in other words, they got this open trench, and the highway's there. Where are you putting this bridge? I'm gonna get across so I can traverse Virginia Avenue.
The bridge will at every cross street that there is now.
Yeah. You're gonna put a bridge there,
That is correct.
a temporary bridge, but I'm looking at a highway in front of me.
It's going to be on the surface road where it is now.
And so you're interrupting the open trench to do this bridge.
Above the
6th Street there,
highway.
and that crossing, there's a.
I'm just looking at it. Okay, it's gonna go over the trench.
Yes, that is correct, a bridge over the
I
trench.
understand it's supposed to be a eight-foot fence there.
Well, that's where places where there's not a bridge. So I mean, if this was the trench, the bridge would go across here. There would be fencing along Virginia Avenue. There would be fencing along the sides of the bridge. But the street here, if that's 3rd Street, that would be then open to traffic across the bridge, crossing over top of where the trench is.
And the highway, it's gonna be before the highway.
But yeah, and all of it is on Virginia Avenue on the south side of the highway. Okay, hopefully that's clear.
I just asked CSX, just a second, please sit down. I just asked CSX because of what was in writing, if they would comment on this statement, and it, from Progressive Railroading. CSX also helped Buckeye Partners LP and Urban Oil Ltd. set up a CBR facility in Albany, New York last year, and is working with 2 other companies. Sorry. By year's end, Plains All American Pipeline LP plans to establish a CBR facility that can accommodate 1 unit train per day in Yorktown, Virginia. Would you explain what that means? We're not going to continue after this. We're not continuing.
I have a question.
So what I've been told by our engineering department is that they are working on another route. There is a alternative route to get to Yorktown. It does not come through DC. So if that does come online, then they will move it a different route to that line.
So it's easy to reroute.
No, it's not easy to reroute. This is a line that's coming from Chicago. This is a line that's coming from South Dakota, West Dakota.
Coming from the west, it's a totally different.
Yeah, it's not coming north-south.
Comes into Norfolk and you
All right. I want to let the commissioner ask the last question, and then I want to say a word here. I also have a question. Before you ask that question, on the alternatives, this really goes to process. The options that are out there. Can those options be, in light of the written comments that you received, must have been many, and comments however you received, can those alternatives be altered in and of themselves in any way? Or do those options remain flat, the only options that are available?
So are you asking if we heard an alternative today that we hadn't considered,
Not
would
just
we
today,
consider it?
Or in the comments, and the options that have been laid out,
Right.
could they be altered in any way to take into account those comments so that it would look different from what that alternative or that option now said?
Well, there's 2 sets of alternatives, and you have the screening matrix with you. So I'm expecting you have a question on that.
I'll just ask you.
But I'm referring to the screening matrix. We did look at alternatives, including rerouting, in the DEIS. We did a screening process and came up with the 4 that we have in the document today. I didn't hear anything today that is substantially different than what we considered in the DEIS. So I feel that we have addressed those. And I understand that people aren't going to...
Not one of your criteria had public safety or any of
Public safety...
Didn't have
your
children's
criteria.
environmental
Public safety is not a criterion there because all those alternatives are inherently designed and considered to have safety
That's
aspects.
not what you said at the last meeting with the mayor.
I said I felt it was, in our discussion.
You do have video of it.
At the end of the day, all of the alternatives presented now are
very similar. They all run trains through an open construction trench. There's no options that do temporary rerouting. There's no options that do permanent rerouting.
You're talking about the 3 build alternative.
For the DEIS, correct. I don't believe that that constitutes an actual DEIS. You're supposed to have 4 alternatives, which are different plans.
There's no requirement for a number of alternatives in a DEIS.
Okay.
But keep going.
Delegate Norton, thank you. Delegate Norton, there's also an option on the table for no build, and essentially no build means that they have to come back to us with different alternatives, with safer alternatives for the community. Will you commit to sending a letter to Secretary Fox and to Mayor Gray asking for no build?
Look, I live in this neighborhood too, and of course, let's start with that. We would like this project not to have to be built. And I don't appreciate the question because everybody knows, I think, that the option that everybody in this room would prefer is that we not have to go through this at all. Now, the real question is what alternatives are available. The reason I asked the question I did was considering the options that are out there. Will the final option,
No build requires them to come back with new options, since these options are all the
I mean,
same.
whatever they come back with, I simply wanted to know of the build options, whether or not they would look exactly like they look on
I can answer
paper,
that. I can answer
or
that.
whether they could be changed in some specific way.
Yes.
And the whole notion of, will I send a letter to Fox? Of course. But that doesn't get you anywhere, people. I can talk to Fox.
One of the challenges.
The real question for the meeting here is, can we stop a train we'd rather not have in our neighborhood? If we can't, then if we can't, well, a lot of us would rather this didn't happen at all. If we can't, then we have to decide what is it we want. Now, we talking about sending letters, shucks, I've tried to get a hearing, and I'm not sure that would have gotten us any place. This draft EIS bothers me in many respects, but when, for example, there's nothing in the draft EIS on children's health at all, in a neighborhood burgeoning with children, when I ask, does the alternatives in and of themselves, none of which we like, allow for substantial changes with any of those alternatives? I'm talking about the build alternatives now.
Yeah, the build alternatives, as you know, in a draft EIS, and the way EPA rates documents. If you don't know this, EPA rates a draft document based on what's in that document without the selection of a preferred alternative. So what they're looking at is all the alternatives together and pretty much looking at a worst case of every aspect of every alternative. The EC2 rating that we got, I'm correct on that, right? EC2 is pretty typical of almost all EISs that you'll see out there. Okay, there's 4 letter rankings. We're number 2 out of the 4. We're second from the top. We're in the middle, insufficient information, which is pretty standard EPA language because we don't have a preferred alternative. We don't have a final design, because we haven't gotten to that point yet, that would address the Congresswoman's questions about can they be adjusted and tweaked. We are considering your comments as we're going through, but we're not at final design because we haven't picked the preferred yet. So yes, we will continue to work on aspects of refining those alternatives if a build is chosen.
If the FEIS selects a build alternative, who has the authority to say no? Is the permitting automatic, or what's the procedure? Delegate Norton asked at the beginning about the process.
Okay, again, this has to go with, that question has to do with explaining the role of federal highway in this whole process. So the federal government. Federal highway has a role because the CSX action, which is to reconstruct the tunnel, affects a federal interest, which are the interstate ramps and interstate access points. Okay. What happens is, because we now have an action in terms of approving the effect of their action on the interstate access points, we have to, Congress or NEPA requires that federal agencies consider the impact of their actions. We have an approval action on the environment. Because of that, we did an EIS on this, what CSX wants to do, we did an EIS. Once we write that EIS, once we determine that all the impacts and mitigations have been addressed as required by NEPA, and we approve the EIS, then we can determine that the only action here is an approval action. It's not like we can say you can't build it. We can only say that, well, what you've done, we can't give you an approval because of the effect to the interstate ramps. But we cannot say, we're not saying here that they can't build a tunnel, but in effect, if we don't approve the action, they can't build the tunnel. You see what I'm saying? If we can't approve what effect they have on the interstate and on the federal interest, we say, well, this doesn't meet our approval.
Right.
We can't approve it, and in that sense, indirectly, they can't do their action. As long as they affect federal interest. That's the key, as long as they affect federal interest. Now, if they want to do that tunnel and there were no federal interest involved, I wouldn't be here.
So
If they weren't affecting interstate facilities, I would not be here.
It's also city streets.
But the city streets are owned by DDOT, not federal highway.
DDOT, can I hear from you?
Yeah, let's hear about the.
All right, we've heard. We've heard, and we're getting now into a repeat of the last meeting. And that really isn't fair, because we were here to hear from EPA. And I do want to say that I appreciate the agencies who were not supposed to speak, but only to comment if EPA had something to say that was relevant, have agreed to answer what questions they have answered. Now, there is inherent frustration, obviously, if you're talking to a community about a railroad running through their community. We began with this notion about transparency and democracy. The frustration I have is with the draft EIS process. They are now in a mode where the agencies are talking among themselves. For example, I'm sure that the EPA is already talking with the agency, the other two agencies. And yet, what we will get is a, quote, final EIS. And the problem I have with the whole process is if this isn't the time to change it, when is? Because we're going to be left with a final, and you've already said supplementals are unheard of or very rare. So well, we know how difficult it is, but that's how people get lawsuits. When in fact, you can't make changes as things go along. Then of course, people get frustrated because they've tried to do it within the process, except over and over again, we will talk, of course, we can't talk about those things in the process. We can't tell you, even if we're taking into account what you're saying here or what you have written. You see, this is a very circular way of trying to get into your process and to get changes from your process. This is an inherently adversarial process. We understand that. That's why there's a comment period. But I don't know. I've known nothing quite like the draft EIS process and what it does to a community seeking somehow to get answers through a process that they are told is in draft form. So this is when you can have some kind of effect on the process. Now, the next thing, and we don't know when this will occur, the next thing will be, of course, the final EIS. Meanwhile, there are federal agencies involved, other agencies involved. I am very concerned about much that's in the draft EIS, but I'm also concerned, for example, from the silence of the Federal Railroad Administration. I mean, they're the ones who regulate railroads. So there are all kinds of huge holes, it seems to me, in the community's understanding, because they simply haven't been laid out so that they are intelligible to any of us. At the same time, I want to thank all of you who came. CSX actually brought people up from Jacksonville, their home office. Some of them, of course, are here all the time. Federal Highways had been here, so had DDOT, and yet they agreed to come again. You had your commissioner here, you had your council member here. Now it's up to us to continue the process and to figure out what more we can do. I've indicated some of the things I'm going to be doing, that I'll be meeting with Homeland Security, that I'll be meeting with NTSB, and that I'll be meeting with Federal Railway. To the extent that anything comes out of those meetings that I think the community must know, needs to know, I will ask those of you who would continue to be interested to come to a meeting. Can I thank you for coming? I don't want to keep people past the time we said the meeting would go from 2 to 4.
I found it very beneficial to hear from the community once again. And I think most of the answers have been as straightforward as you can expect from a process that they tell us is secretive in the first place. That's my problem. Thank you very much.
Right, whose is this one? That one's yours? Red?
Red's mine.
This one yours? No. Oh, that's heavy.